All right, welcome everyone to your first small group on finances and budgets with Gloria. Just a quick note, our OVW note is that the opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this training are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Office on Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. And then I will officially pass it over to Gloria now.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I know that some of you are right on the cusp of it being in the afternoon. So just kind of give yourself some grace, and if you need to get up and stretch or get up and nourish yourself, make sure that you take care of yourself. And I know this is a topic that can be really dry, and it's multifaceted and hairy, and so at any time, please feel free to stop and ask me a question, or use the chat. And I know that Marcella will help me in the event that I miss any. But welcome back. We're here to continue our learning journey on things that are around financial reporting and budgeting. And so I'm glad that I didn't scare everybody off, and that you came back. Right? So just, come on, here we go. So this is what we'll be talking about. And then in terms of our objectives for this next hour, it is a little ambitious, but I think we can get through it. And the majority of this will be me providing a refresher on some of the things that we learned and we covered in our previous time together. You are going to get some homework, so giving you a heads up. And then I'm going to try to spend the majority of the time around budgeting. And again, we started on this when we last met, and then I was a dork and didn't share my screen when I thought it was sharing. But I'll give it a little bit more depth and time, so it doesn't feel quite so rushed. And again, you're going to see pictures of baby animals, because when you associate what you're learning and you see a picture of a baby animal, research suggests that those things will stick more to you. So I'm going to start with, you received this resource in the materials that Marcella has sent to you. It is a really, easy to read guide. It's like a guide of some finance pieces for non-finance professionals. So we don't try to make sure that it's not so driven by the language of finance, but that it's easy to read. So for your homework, when we next see each other, is to take one chapter in that resource that is interesting to you, and then we'll use our time just discussing that. And if you haven't had a chance to look at this resource, when I call it a chapter, it's like three to 5 pages, and it's really easy to read language. So don't think that you're going to have to spend hours and hours prepping. And it isn't about, come back and report and tell me what you've learned. It's just like, what did you find interesting about it? And then what questions may it have brought up for you? So again, not hard, but it is a little bit about self-paced learning. And that way it gives you an opportunity to kind of spend whatever amount of time you need or want to spend on that chapter, so that we can talk about it together. And then it also gives you an opportunity to talk with the whole group about what other people may have identified was interesting to them. So again, jumping into the quick review part. So we started with just some basic definitions so that we could get the foundational piece together. And we started with, let's talk about an organization's assets. Like, what are those things? And we talked about 2 different kinds of assets, right? Current assets and fixed assets. And we talked about, what is the difference between those kinds of assets? And let's come up with some examples. So current assets are things that the organization owns that have value to them, but you're likely going to use them within the next year. So some examples of current assets are going to be things like cash in the bank. You're going to use that to continue to run your operations. Other kinds of assets that you'll use within the next year are going to be things like supplies. If you have a residential component, it may be like your consumables, like not only your food, but clothing that you may provide, um, uh, any kind of supplies that you keep on hand. If you're a non-breast program, if you have like a food pantry, that would be part of your current assets. So it's things that the agency owns and will utilize within the next year in executing its mission. Another type of asset was accounts receivable. And what that means is and I'm speaking directly to most of us that work in similar organizations we're funded by grants or even foundations. And when we get this is very standard in a government grant, you expend your resources and then you bill the funding source to get reimbursed. When you've completed the work and you're billing them and you're waiting for payment, that's an accounts receivable. So it's an asset because somebody else has an obligation to pay you because you've already done the work. So all of these are current assets. And then we talked about fixed assets. These, again, are things that the agency owns, but they have a longer use than 1 year. Things that come to mind would be not only like the vehicle that the agency owns, any kind of furniture, whether it be for residential or just your office desks that you monitors, things like that that you would use in your operations. Any kind of technology that is being used, but it also includes your building, right? So if you own your building, those are things that are going to be used over more than 1 year, and those are fixed assets. Then our conversation took us to, but where do organizations get their income, right? How do they sustain themselves to be able to execute their mission? And we talked about certainly donations, any kind of fundraising events, or like there's so many, creative ideas around fundraising. And then most nonprofits have some level of support from government grants or foundation grants. So it is the resources that come into the organization, again, that allow you to execute your mission. And then we talked about expenses, like what are expenses for an organization? And they run the full gamut, right? Again, what do we need to do to be able to execute our mission? Always at the top of that list is we need our people. We need people. We're in the helping industry and helping profession. And so it is our people that we need to make sure that we compensate and provide benefits for. We also have expenses like anything related to utilities, um, supplies, the purchase of those supplies, any printing and that you might do for your outreach materials. And then you might have a direct client assistance fund. So if you're helping your clients either get their documents, whatever it is that they may need, or provide childcare assistance, then those are the types of expenses that, again, the organization has to be able to execute its mission. And so why was it important to learn all of those terms? Like why do I go through the trouble of telling you assets and income and expense? Is because any entity that is in operation is going to have two financial reports. They may have multiple, but every one of them is going to have these two financial reports. One of them is called the Statement of Financial Position, and it's exactly that. It's like, what is my financial position today as of the time of this report? And what it does is it lists all your assets, both current and fixed, right? So this is everything that the agency owns that has value. The money in the bank, obligations for payment that we're waiting for. It will be all our inventory and supplies that we might have on hand. It will include our building, our vehicles, our furniture, and our fixtures. So we're trying to account for anything of value that the organization has. And then we're gonna find out what obligations or what debt does the agency have. And it may mean that we still owe our credit card, we're still paying on our building, we took out a loan, those kinds of things. So what debt or obligation does the agency have to repay something? And the statement of financial position, which is also called the balance sheet, is going to take everything that the organization owns. So again, all of those assets, it will subtract all the things that it owes, all that the loans and payments that are due. And what is remaining is what's called net assets. You may also hear it be called a fund balance, a net worth. It could be um, the equity of an organization. But in just the simplest way to look at it is this report tells the reader this is everything that the organization owns. This is what it owes. So this is the value, the net assets of the organization. The second report is statement of financial activity. And that's exactly what it is. It tells the reader this is where all our sources of income is coming from. And then we identify these are all the ways in which we're spending our resources, the expenses that are necessary, to execute our mission. And what the statement of financial activity does primarily is it's going to tell the reader if we had more revenue than expenses, we had a net gain. And it's okay to call it a profit. We had more revenue than we had expenses. If the other direction is true and we had more expense than we had revenue, then we would have had a net loss. And so both of these reports are intended to, one, demonstrate that you're able to steward your resources, and two, it lets you make management decisions because you know where you are financially. So again, the first report is called a statement of financial position. We want to know what is the agency worth. And then the second one is, did we have more revenue than expenses? So we had a net gain, a profit, or did we have more expenses than we had revenue? And that's a net loss. So it doesn't matter what kind of entity you are. You could be the mom and pop restaurant that's just down the street. You could be Amazon, any size of entity. These reports remain consistent. So for us nonprofits, this is exactly how we're going to show our donors, our funders, our supporters that we can provide information to them that quickly tells us where the organization is. I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have any questions? Does it ring a bell a little bit? Do the words kind of come back to you a little bit? I see some head shaking, so thank you. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. So I'm going to take us to where we review. Again, this is a quick refresher so that I kind of take you back to that day that we talked about. And the first report that we're going to look at, we need to switch screens. Can you guys see an Excel worksheet? Okay, thank you. So we're going to look at, this is a statement of financial activity. It is also called a profit and loss statement because we're trying to figure out, did the agency have a net gain, a profit, or did it have a loss? This is my organization on December 31st of 2016. So kind of the backdrop for this is that the agency has a fiscal year that starts September 1. So this is after 4 months into the fiscal year. And I'm going to focus on the top part of this report. So I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger to make it easier to read. but we're going to focus on the revenue side. And then I'm showing you how to read it so that you can track um, um, the report. So column A is a description. Column C are the actual expenditures through that December 31st date. Column D is the annual budget. Column E is what is the difference between what is actual and it's comparing it to our annual budget. And then the column F is the percentage in relation to the budget. So if I take the first line, it says grant revenues. The total at the end of December was almost $956,000. The budget is 4.2 million. The difference between where we actually are and the annual budget is 3.3 million. And when you look at column F, at this juncture, that the budget is the agency is at 22% of the budget. So the idea behind this is so that the reader can quickly see not what the actual number is. It can remind us what the budget amount is, and then it'll tell us how far are we from our budget, and then what percentage of the budget are we at. So I'm not going to read each line item, but you would read it exactly the same way. So you have your budget, and your budget is your goal. You've spent some time in the past developing your budget, and now you're trying to figure out, as I benchmark, how am I doing? Am I overspending? Am I on track? Am I underspending? So that's the way that you'll read the top part of this report. So at the end of December, there was total revenues of $1,282,000, $684. And then the budget is just shy of $5 million. So at the end of 4 months, we are $3.7 million away from the annual budget. So that means we're projecting that for the remaining 8 months, we're going to get to that. We're going to secure that 3.7 million. So again, you're just reading the line from left to right so that you're able to give yourself that gauge. So the elements that I would take away that would be important for me when I'm reading this part of the report is that, are there areas of concern, and are there areas that we can celebrate? And it's not just a celebration, but what did we do right? Because we want to keep doing that more and more, right? So when I look at this and I see that the biggest line item, grant revenues, we're at 22%, I would be talking to my finance folks, and I would say, are we on track? Are we going to get the grants that we had budgeted for? Is there anything that we need to be concerned there? And sometimes those details will make sense. Like sometimes it'll be, well, we had difficulty filling positions, so we haven't used the full grant, or the grant came in, but it came in 2 months late. Like there'll be more context, but what I'm trying to convey to you is like that you can be confident about asking that question. Like, why does this number look like this? And not necessarily your job to know the details. It's just about being confident to ask the question. When I look at line item that has the event registration, this one here, it's only at 6%. So I would ask the question, like, what's going on? How come we're only at 6% and we're 4 months into the fiscal year? And probably the likely answer that I would get would be, well, we do have some events coming up, but they don't happen until February and March. So not a concern, but it was a good question. And then there's a couple where we're already over 100%. That means we've already reached the budget and exceeded it. And why is that important to acknowledge, right? It's like, I would want to know, what did we do in private support? Maybe we did a campaign. Maybe we got a gift that we weren't anticipating. How do we repeat those things, right? How do we make them reoccur so that we can be successful? So when you do this and you're looking at those columns of information and you're asking the questions that come to mind for you, you are analyzing financial statements. That's what you're doing. Your job isn't to figure out where the debits and the credits are, or why is it that events is only at 6%. Your role as you continue to get in your grow your leadership is to be able to say, I want to ask that question because it probably has a good answer. And if the answer means we have to work on it, then we know we need to work on it, right? But that is what you're getting from these reports. You would follow the exact same process on the expenditures. So you would say, if um, keeping in mind column C is actual, if at the end of December we've spent 666,000 in employee compensation, the budget is 2.2 million. So we still have $1.5 million in our budget. I would say, is this tracking? Is this around are we set to spend, or do we have vacancies? And then if we have vacancies, do we have an opportunity to use those resources someplace else? But you would go through the same process. Where are we now, and how does it compare to our budget? And then when you look at the report in its entirety, you can see that there was almost $1.3 million in revenue. You had 1,085,000 in expenses. So you actually had a net gain. You had a profit for this period, right? So that tells you something else, that your organization either is doing successful. If it was the other way around and we had lost 197,000, then we would need to be able to say, okay, let's think about this now and get us on a path that's going to help us still be successful. And then the balance sheet report again was, let's look at everything that the agency owns. So in this report, it lists these are the type of assets. They have cash, accounts receivable, fixed assets, they have an endowment. So the total assets for the organization is 8.4 million. And then we need to know, but how much debt or obligations do they have? And the total obligations, total liabilities, things the debt that we have to pay is $209,753. So when we say, what is the net assets of this organization? What is its net worth? What is its fund balance or its equity? Then we can say, this organization, if it shut its door down tomorrow and it paid off all the debt that it had, it would still have a value of 8.2 million, 8,265,000. So this report is telling the reader, how financially stable are they? Can they pay their debt? Do they have any reserves? Do they have enough cash on hand to be able to respond to the agency's needs? That's why this report is important. And again, it doesn't matter what size your agency is. If you're a small organization, that is, even if you're just starting out, this is exactly how you would track if you were a $10 million organization that had different kinds of assets. Does that make sense for folks? Is there any questions on this part? Does it still sound like I'm an alien talking from outer space, or is it putting some things together? Okay, good deal. So I'm gonna share screens back to the PowerPoint. And so we've done a review of the financial statements. Sorry, that was a slide I should have removed. I just, as we step into the budgeting component of the conversation, I just want to keep reassuring this message. Oftentimes I hear staff and organizations talk about, oh, I can't do that because it's not in my budget, or we can't do something because of our budget. And it almost sounds a little bit punitive. But the reality, I would love for us to have like this mind shift where a budget doesn't restrict you. Quite the contrary, it empowers you, right? If you have the the full information and you need to change things, or you thought again, we thought we were going to be fully staffed with 10 people, but we've had 3 vacancies, and I know the rest of my budget, then maybe I have the ability to use my resources in another way so that I can complement the needs. So again, I would encourage you, as you continue on your leadership journey, that you look at budgets as places where it empowers you, not harnesses you. Um, I covered and I'll just cover it very briefly because it really applies to anything new that you're trying to learn, right? It's exciting. At first it seems intimidating, and then it sounds exciting, and then it's like, forget it, I just lost it. I don't know what I'm doing. It doesn't make sense. I had it for like 5 seconds and now it left me. And then as you continue to build your muscle in this area, you start to realize, they said current assets. I know what that is. Or I am, this statement of financial activity, I've heard that before. And so just give yourself the grace that anything that is worth learning is going to go through this. You're going to go through this process. So we talked about this, and this is again where I'd like to spend the bulk of our time. So before you even start, and I would say you would do it even for a full agency budgeting process, but to make it digestible, we're going to make it about a project. So before we even pull out a spreadsheet, before we start looking at historical information, I would say that budgeting starts with developing your vision, right? Like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And it's really a conversation. And again, my thinking is it should be the executive leader, the senior team folks, but also the people who are actually doing the work, right? The frontline staff, because you will get information from them that you may have missed, right? So to me, it is about, let's have a conversation. What do we want to accomplish? What are we learning that our community needs? Whatever our mission is, what are we learning that the needs exist? So that conversation about just let's just be in community for a second. That's where it starts. It's like, what are we hearing from our community that we have an ability to influence? And then you can, once you have the big vision, you can start to refine it. So this is a complete project that is completely made up, but let's say that I had pulled in the staff because we were looking at some data, and it was like, this particular neighborhood has been having a lot of incidents or an upward trend of either dating violence, family violence, sexual assault. So we want to go help and be present in that neighborhood. So we've done the visioning part. It's like, wow, a lot of our clients are coming from this zip code or coming from this particular area. Let's do something that is more proactive. And so we want to amplify healthy relationships in that community. And then we can start asking ourselves, okay, the vision is big. Now let's start refining it. What is it that we need if we want to be successful? Like, if we really want to create that change and be responsive to the needs of that community, what do we need to be successful? And this is when you're starting to define the pieces that are going to contribute to that success. We need staff to execute it. We're probably going to need some supplies. We're going to need some support from the office. And if we're going to be working in neighborhoods, I would say we need food and entertainment, because that's how we're going to bring people to us, right? And then we have to define, what does success look like? And again, if I could offer you a mind shift, every time we submit a grant application, we define it as deliverables, or this is how many people I'm going to train. And for me, it's like shift the conversation to say, what does success look like for us? And again, in this scenario where we're trying to go into a specific neighborhood, and again, this is all made up, but it's just to give you an idea. Me and my team get together and we say, well, success will look like we will be in that neighborhood at least 4 times in the next year. We want to reach at least 100 people so that um, we're doing that direct contact with the community. We want the community, that area that we really want to focus on, that they recognize us as an agency that that is a resource to them. And then we want to have 3 new collaborators. We want to make sure that, we just don't go in for a year and then peace out and we're done. But we want to have collaborators that can continue the work so that it just doesn't rely on us. Um, does that sound like in any way familiar to something you may be doing or something that you can relate to? Even if it's like at the simplest way, right? So to me, as we haven't even started um, Excel sheets, right? We're talking and we're saying, well, what does it look like? What do we need? Um, and then you're able to say, okay, we took a bigger vision, we're defining it, and then the final definition is going to be your budget. So then you can determine like what data is important as I start before, again, I haven't even gotten to an Excel sheet yet. What do I need so that I can develop um, my project in a way that it's going to value all the visioning that I did and all the definition that I did. So we're going to make sure that because we said we need people, we're going to make sure that we get all the full costs that relate to our people. So sometimes I see organizations that will only budget the salary, but they don't think about all the other pieces of compensation. So we want to make sure we define all the costs that come with supporting our people to support the project. And then, is it a new or existing project? If it's an existing project, then we can say, what did we spend last year? And was it successful last year? What should we have changed from last year? Or if we did it 2 years ago, what new information do we have that'll make this year more, will help us define this year better, right? Did we wind up serving 200 people last year? So we ran out of, we didn't have enough staff to support it. So again, if it gives you an opportunity to reflect on not only what did we spend, but what was the outcome of it? Were we successful? Do we need to make any modifications? Do we need more people? Do we need less people? Do we need more supplies, less supplies? Um, and then if it's a new project, then we need to be able to continue with refining our vision. How many staff do we need? Do we have any point of reference that we might have done something similar? And what's an appropriate number of staff to get us to success, which was reaching 100 people, getting 3 new collaborators, and having that neighborhood recognize us as a resource, right? Would there be other things that you think we need to consider at this juncture? I need to drink water. Nobody wants to ask a question while I drink water? No. You're a shy group today. Okay. Is it making sense? To get a thumbs up, thumbs down, like, so, Gloria? Okay. Thank you. So again, now let's look at a couple of spreadsheets. So it's like, now we've gone through the process. We've met with the staff. People have contributed their ideas. We're really clear about where we're going. We took it to step 2, where it was like, what are we going to need? We all agree on what we consider success. So now we're going to go down to the nitty gritty. Let's talk about what resources we need so that we can execute a project that's going to be impactful to that community. I like it when I'm over here in Austin because I have 3 screens. So I can see all of you. I can have a PowerPoint over here and my Excel. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a dork that way, y'all. So most of the time when you're doing budgeting, and again, because most nonprofits are our biggest asset and resource is going to be our people, because that's what we do, right? We're in the helping profession. So when you do a budget, that's going to be the largest component of your budget. So I would start with a part of the budget that is probably going to be most time consuming, and it is again the portion around employee compensation. So what I did is I just randomly, named some positions. I gave them an hourly rate. And then when you're budgeting, if you ever want to figure out what is somebody's annual amount, if their hourly rate is something, what does it look like annually? You use 2080 as your number. It's 40 hours at 52 weeks. And then that gets you to the annual salary. And then you start to track what other expenses come from that belong in compensation. So column E would be your federal income tax that the employer has to pay. It's the same across the country. It's 7.65%. And then the other columns may be other things that, depending on where you live, that these expenses would materialize. So federal unemployment tax, state unemployment tax, if you provide benefits like medical, dental, workers' compensation is like an insurance coverage that if one of your employees gets hurt on the job, they cover those expenses, and you might have a retirement plan. So you have to factor all of those costs into your people, right? Because we want to make sure that we pay their taxes. We want to make sure that we give them the same benefits that are available to other folks. And you want to capture all of that. And then in the scenario that I developed, my team and I identified that we didn't need 3 people full time on this project. So we needed 100% of the project coordinator. So we need one person that is going to own this project. They're going to lead it. They're going to be the primary. But they also need support, right? Because this project's too big and needs more people. So we decided that we needed about 75% of a training manager. And then if 100% of a person is 40 hours a week, 75% would be 30 hours a week. And then the executive leader, usually because there's oversight on a project or some level of supervision, like it could have been not the executive director, but it could have been a program director. And we said 5% of that person's time. So I made the spreadsheet so that we know what the total cost is for the project coordinator, training manager, and executive director. And then I was able to apply the percentage of time. So this lets you see based on all the other things that we talked about, the vision and the definition and what success will look like. This is helping now define, this is the resources I need for my people to be able to make that project successful. I'll pause here. Is there any questions? So once you have again, this is typically the biggest part of the budget, then you would have the opportunity to start thinking about all of those other costs. So, and this one, and I'm showing you what I think are good practices. So And every time you budget for something, show the calculation, like where did that number come from? Sometimes somebody picks up a project that somebody else started or their staff transition. But if your budget description tells the reader how it was calculated, it's easier for somebody else to step in and try to follow that same logic. So the first part of this just captures the employees, this first part, right? We said 100% of the project coordinator, 75% of the training manager, and 5% of the executive director. If your grant required match, like say there was another, you had another source, and since some of these positions are not 100%, you could say, I can find match because this person is at 75%. I can use the other portion as match if the grant requires it. Every other line item is exactly what, when we went through the visioning process, we're like, we're going to need staff. We're going to need supplies. We're going to need to be able to pay our people to go back and forth from the office or to pick up supplies or to be in the neighborhood. So we want to make sure we have mileage. We might, like I said, we need food and entertainment. I think all of us that do kind of community organizing, we know that that's how, we help communities come together, but maybe we're going to try to get it donated. So I'll include it in the budget, but it'll be under in kind. And then again, you'll go down the list of expenses that you thought that you already identified that you needed. I don't know if you recall this, but I had said we'll need some office support, and that's where you're going to start to see what we need. We need somebody that works on our laptops for the whole agency or for our computers. We need support from the office on HR, for example, if these are costs that the organization as a whole has, and so each project gets a portion of that cost to it, because while those, what they call direct expenses, the supplies that you need specifically for that project, the food that you might purchase for that particular project, there are things called indirect, and it's cost like the utilities, the use of your office space when you're back at the office working on the project, right? Those are kinds of costs that are shared across all areas of the organization. They don't belong to just one project. So you'll see some of those costs in there, and that's why you'll be able to see them. So every entity needs to be able to recapture the pro rata amount of those expenses when you're doing a specific project. And then, continuing with some of it, we the team that came together to develop this project said, we also need to cover somebody's cell phone. They're going to need a level of access to internet when they're in the office. We need to use the agency's database to be able to keep track of the 100 people that we're working with, or the collaborators. I'm going to need my laptop. So all of these expenses are directly tied to your project. Some of them, again, are very clear that they belong uniquely to this project. And some of these are expenses that come from just being part of the organization. I am going to pause here to ask if you guys have any questions.
Yes, Vanessa has a question in the chat where she said, can you explain match again? We have several contracts with a match requirement. In my role currently, I don't need to worry about it, but I would like to get a more clear understanding of what match actually means.
Okay. So if any of your agencies, this is an example, get VOCA, Victim of Crime Act funding, then the agency is required to provide a 20% match to the grant. So let's say that this project that we're doing, we were going to submit it as an application for funding under VOCA. We would have to have a column that talks about match. So if I could use the training manager as an example. So the training manager, she's only going to be working 75% on this project. But the training manager works full time, but she may be doing training on not this particular neighborhood, but does training that will support the overall training curriculum, right? So because we didn't use her time at 100%, whatever is paying the 25% of her salary, maybe it's coming from another grant, maybe it's coming out of unrestricted or a contract that you may have, however her position is funded, we can say that 25% that we're not charging to the grant is being covered by another source, and therefore I can match it to this. Another way match shows up in VOCA, especially for organizations like ours, is they let you use volunteers. So say that we used our staff to put on the event, but we also invited volunteers in the neighborhood to help us set up or to be greeters or to, manage certain pieces. We would just keep a log and track their hours. And so maybe they donated 5 hours every time that we met. They give you an allowable amount that has a value, and you can use that as a match. If we wind up getting the food and the music donated that was in this budget, where is it? Yeah. If we wind up putting it and we're like, we're not going to pay for it, but somebody's going to give it to us as a donation, we can move it out of in kind and move it into match. It was an essential expense to make the project successful, but it was provided from another source. Whether it's volunteer hours or we use another funding source to demonstrate that training manager, a portion of that training manager that is not on this grant is still relevant to the project. Did that help with match?
Yeah, that's really helpful to know actually, because I knew that it had something to do in our organization. I knew it had something to do with volunteer hours, but I wasn't fully aware of what it actually meant.
Yeah.
So that was actually super helpful.
So for example, if we say that we're going to apply for $100,000 on VOCA, I'll make it easy. We're going to apply for $10,000 out of VOCA. That means we need to have $2,000, an additional $2,000 as our match because it requires 20%. So the total budget is now $12,000. What we're getting out of our VOCA grant and then what we're going to match, and that's your total project cost.
And match can be volunteer hours, or it can be funds from another contract or like unrestricted funds, things
Correct.
like that. Okay, got it.
It can also be things that are donated. So like when I was at the crisis center, the dairy provided all the milk to the shelter. And so they establish a value and I could use that as a match. So what do y'all think about this approach to budgeting? Does it make sense to you? I feel like based on the questions that I'm getting, some of you are familiar with the budgeting process already. And I think that what you can insert is like, let's still have that visioning piece. Earlier in the week when I did the other group, they asked a couple of really good questions. It was like, but what if we're just starting out? This feels like it's a budget for like you're creating you're established and you're or you're applying for a specific opportunity. And so she said, what about for an organization that is just starting? And my response is, I would do the exact same thing, because I would have the vision, I would have the definition, and I would have what costs my best thinking on costs were, so that I could go to a foundation, or I could go to a corporation, or I could go to the car dealership and say, can you fund this? Look, this is the vision, this is the impact that we're going to have, and I already know how we would use these resources. And then, you know, we're applying this to like a small project. But I would say, if you were doing your agency-wide budgeting, say that you're a organization, you want to do the same exercise, I think you can do the same thing on a bigger scale, right? It's like, we can say, what is our data telling us? We're telling us, it may be that we have way more teenagers coming into shelter than we used to have. It may mean that we have more teen moms coming into our services. So let's start with the vision, so that we can be responsive to our community. And that way you're still having the vision piece. You're still saying, asking yourselves, what does success look like? And then as you start big with your vision, then you define it, further. And then the last part is, what are the necessary resources that are needed, and how would they be used? And then back to my comment about a budget should empower you, then you feel empowered, because you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. You know what the goal is. You know you're responding to your community's needs, and the expenses have logic to them, right? Well, we calculated it based on this, and it means that we did our best thinking, but something may change, and that we're comfortable that something changes. I'm not talking like an alien? No? You guys got me? I know we're close to time, but is there any question that comes for you on any part of this, or anything that we met with before? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I'm just sitting here, like, just thinking. So you had mentioned, like, when you're like creating this budget, um, prior to having this already prepared prior to meeting with donors and investors like that. Would you also say that there should, like, job descriptions should also be like budget, job descriptions, business plan, all of that together
I,
for
I,
their
yeah, I think the more that you can demonstrate to somebody that we are worth investing in, we are worth your donation, we are worth your gift, because we have everything together. Um, and you can still convey that message of urgency. Our community needs us, right? I think that positions you really well. And in a lot of foundation applications, it almost asks you for all of those things. And most government grant applications ask you, like, what do these positions do? And what is your sustainability plan? And so the more you can be equipped, then when the next application comes out, or the next opportunity to talk to a donor, you have it. You have it.
Thank you.
I heard it was somebody's belated birthday.
Yes, I don't want to distract people from asking questions, but it was my birthday yesterday. Thank you, everyone.
Happy belated birthday. Thank you for all you do for us, Marcella. I know it's 21, right?
Yes, I'm 21. No, I'm actually not 21 anymore. haven't been for at least 10 years.
But anything else that comes to mind? And like, it's never like this is the only time you get to talk to me, or like if later on you're like, hey, I should have asked a question on something else. Just email me. Just email me. And then don't forget, for our next session, you have homework. So please look at that financial toolkit. I promise you it's not a heavy lift. But I do think as you continue your leadership journey, some of it is, self-paced and self-initiated. So take a look and come back and we can have a good discussion over it. Marcella, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything final you'd like to say.
I think that's it. So just remember, like Gloria said, go ahead and try to read one of the chapters from the toolkit. It is in your finance and budgets folder. And then we have our second session next week, which will be the end of all of your small groups. And then the following week will be our webinar on communications and branding. So moving forward for the next, I would say 1 or 2 months, we'll only have one webinar at a time in the month. It's been a little heavy this first few months. So thank you for showing up and staying present with us. So I will see you all next week. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, guys.